Thank you for coming here. First, we will talk about user management and authentication, about how you can get your users into Nextcloud, how to secure perhaps your authentication, and see what other mechanisms there are and infrastructure we provide. So at the very beginning, we will talk about the very basic built-in users and user management. And afterwards, we talk about the backends, about the LDAP backend and about the SAML app. Afterwards, about the two-factor authentication, to have perhaps a more secure authentication mechanism. And in the end, about the app's passwords. Okay, so the built-in user management or built-in users and groups, they are obviously stored in the database. They are directly integrated into Nextcloud. It's not the most reasonable way to manage your users if you have already an existing user base. However, maybe there are some use cases for you where it might make sense. There's a provisioning API that allows to programmatically add, manage, delete, edit your users. And it's all administrated from the central user management page, which is not exclusively for built-in users. Now you see it perhaps not so good up there in the screenshot. But basically it looks like this. On the upper left you have a settings pane that you can show and hide by clicking on settings, and it, for instance, allows you to show some more options in the table on the right and the center. And that's basically where you manage the users. You can add them by the text buttons up there and see the information stored, and also are able to delete or disable and enable them. This and enabling of users, of local users, this is a new thing, a new feature that came in Nextcloud 12. It also works for users not only from the built-in user management or users. And what is also possible now is to change user account information using the provisioning API. So on some other place, a user can enter some information about himself, like phone number, homepage, etc. And this is going to be used or can be sent to a lookup server, what Björn is going to talk about later. Also far, you know that you can also modify this via the provisioning API. And what's also new is that a password reset now works when you enter an email address instead of your username. Let's have an overview about the LDAP backend. So we follow here an approach that is actually server agnostic. There's one place where we need to use some attributes that are specific to the server implementation. That's why it's written here mostly server agnostic. It affects the recognition of user entries. So we use UUID of an LDAP entry to be able to follow users even if their distinguished name, the DN, changes. It's actually user agnostic because you can also override the attribute and settings if you have some LDAP server that's not supported. Supported are officially Open LDAP and Active Directory. There are some more implementations that will work out of the box, which usually have been where the attributes have been provided by community members. What is also new here is that we introduced a password reset feature. This is opt-in, and that's the only place where writing to the LDAP server is required if you opt into this. Otherwise, we never write to the LDAP server. And also to support this, we have support for P-policy in OpenLDAP, so password policies where you can define, for instance, when a password has or needs to be changed again. And what's already there is that there's also a possibility for custom or third-party apps to retrieve an LDAP connection for a given user and also do some operations there. So that's the way to enable other apps to get access to this. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So support for users and groups is pretty expected. We include also primary groups. In the past, it was only possible for Active Directory, but meanwhile, it's also possible to get the primary groups for OpenLDAP. You can define LDAP filters and different bases to reduce the affected trees and have better performance when searching in the LDAP tree. Detection of member of support is there. So that's also a performance, a way to increase the performance because it reduces the lookup time if you need to find out which user belongs to which group. And another new thing that we also introduced is some configuration mechanisms via an OCS API. So now you can also, from a remote, configure an LDAP connection. We have also a use case where we use it directly. That's in the Untitled integration. And yeah, there we provide a UCS or Untitled application, which is automatically configured and also gets the LDAP information from the Untitled server and configures the Nextcloud accordingly. Next up, single sign-on and SAML. So I think from very early on we have this SAML app, or SAML backend, licensed under AGPL 3, written by Lucas. New thing here is that it's now distributed via the App Store, makes it independent from the server releases, and that means that you can have bug fixes and perhaps new important features faster than a server release happens. It can work together with the LDAP backend to have the LDAP as a source for the users. And obviously it makes Nextcloud be the service provider from SAML, which talks to the IDP. Yes, so as said, it's implemented within the application layer, makes it very flexible. And so the other possibility would have been to have an Apache module, which is very limited. And in that case, we have many possibilities to do some extra handling with the app. For instance, Lucas introduced attribute mapping. That means from the information from the SAML ticket, you can extract display names and email addresses. And soon there will be more attributes that can be mapped from this information and set in Nextcloud. Contrary to the local and the LDAP backend, which can operate in parallel, or which operate in parallel, the SAML backend is working exclusively. This also might change in the future. Lucas is working on this. It's working with OneLogin, Microsoft ADFS, Shibboleth, and Lemon LDAP. Further on, the SSO itself, it can also work with setting Apache environment variables, as well as Kerberoth via an Apache module. Coming to the two-factor authentication, this simply is that you will when you will try to log in, you will need to have a second factor that you provide to the login mechanism. A common way to do this are one-time passwords, or time-based one-time passwords, and this was already introduced in Nextcloud 11 as well as the SMS gateway. So, for instance, you have your mobile phone, this will create you one password that you can then type in on your laptop when you're logging in. What is new is also their support for UTF, so some hardware tokens like the YubiKey, that you don't need your mobile phone and type in some number, but just insert this USB token and get authenticated with this additional information. It's also possible to write more on custom providers for this, should be very easy. And the one thing that's not supported are the clients. So if you're authenticating with other apps or with the APIs, you will need to use an app password. And about the app passwords, we're going to talk later. Here are some screenshots about the two-factor authentication, an example about the TOTP thing. So on the personal setting, you can enable it and scan this code with your mobile phone. It will recognize it, get a key, and create the first password, and you need to verify this in the text box. In every further login via the web interface, you will need only to enter your normal password, but here also this code created, for instance, from your smartphone. Yes. Well, and if you want to use a hardware token, that's an option a bit further down. You need to take a checkbox and then also insert your hardware token for the initialization. Okay, so the app passwords are additional passwords that you can create additionally, so that you, for instance, use different passwords on different devices or for different apps. The advantage is that if you lose the other device, you can delete this in your personal settings, and that device cannot log in anymore, but you don't need to have to change the password everywhere else. As said, they are enforced when you're using this two-factor authentication, because there's no way currently to use a two-factor on APIs and other devices, except you go via the web login, of course. And yes, basically that's it. There's one more functionality with it. You can also revoke access for the file, for a file access for the app token, so that if you have clients that only should read the calendar, that they are not allowed to integrate or interact with the files. It's a further security measurement. And we then also have the session invalidation. So each session is registered and presented on your personal page. You can see what device or browser, whatever is active or was active when last time. And you can also delete these sessions. Again, that makes sense when you lost a phone, laptop, or other device. What's new with the sessions is that the Remember Me also works for external storages now, because the password that's needed to mount them is now encrypted with a session ID in the database. That also means that the administrator is not able to decrypt it. It's only possible the session ID. Therefore, it was considered a safe way to implement this. I think in Nextcloud 13 we also integrate both sections of the UI into one common thing, into one common table, because essentially it's just you can add a password, but otherwise it's always the same. You have a name and you have the last activity and some options like deleting a session or a password. Okay, that was the overview. There's another feature coming up. It's a new login flow. Lukas will talk about it in his talk about security later. Now I'm open for your questions. Yeah. There is an authentication that's true. I would ask you to request this from Lukas later on, because I don't have deep information about this. I have seen it working already, but I don't know much about this, other than it's built into Cure directly, and yeah, you can register applications within there, but ask him, he knows more in detail. Welcome. Up here. Okay, if I understand the question correctly, it was about the SAML works as a service provider. Yes, this is the case. Mm-hmm. So, ja, oder so.
So. I think it's...
So the question was, I'm able to use the SAML stuff as a service provider, so then I can just use it with any web server, just as an SP. Say, for example, I can hook it up to a Shibboleth IDP or another IDP that supports that. Kind of like currently I have a simple SAML PHP service provider. It's just like that, right?
Any other questions so we can collect and then ask Arthur answers them? Is there anything more? Yes.
I spoke it loud.
So. Okay, perfect.
There's an issue with SAML authentication, but then the method of connection is working. Good.
The WebDev connection should work. If it does not, I think it's a bug, because we use WebDev, of course, for our clients. And if that wouldn't be working, then you could also not sing. So. Okay. Thank you.
So the problem is actually a different one. So what we do is the WebDAV client that you probably use is Windows Explorer or something like that, and Windows Explorer only supports like basic authentication, and I think probably you can hook it up to Kerberos or something like that, but it doesn't support SAML. So if you go with the Windows Explorer against the SAML service provider of Nextcloud, Nextcloud will say, hey, please identify here via SAML, here you can authenticate, and Windows Explorer will just say, oh, I don't speak this protocol. So if you want to use the Windows Desktop Explorer thingy with Nextcloud, you have to create an application-specific password, like you have to do as well with second factor. This is sadly not something that we can change hugely, but if you use like the official Nextcloud desktop client, it should work like with an integrated login flow. And I will also have some nice slides about this later on, where we go into the direction of single sign-on.
Any other questions? Or? Then thanks, Arthur.